studies with us. So
Cool. That's great to hear.
we're a big fan of his.
Good. Yeah. No, Eric's a great guy. We're working on a little bit of a hack project right now. So.
Cool.
So we might as well get started. Hi, I'm James McGuire, editor of Datamation, and our topic today is how to select a big data solution, what you as a business should be thinking about as you make that decision. To talk about that, we've got three great experts, including Dan Kogan, Director of Product Marketing for Tableau Software. Hello to you, Dan.
Hi there, everyone.
And you are up in Seattle, I know, right?
I am. Yeah. Beautiful hot sunny day here.
What's that?
It's a beautiful hot sunny day here. So rare.
I was up there several months back. I couldn't believe, like, Seattle is like the ultimate boomtown, even more than San Francisco. It's like cranes, everything's going. It's like enormous energy in Seattle. Right?
Yeah, we've got a couple small software companies down here who are building a lot of stuff in the downtown.
Yeah, I think I've heard of that.
Yeah, no, so a lot going on here.
Also with us is Satyen Sangani, CEO of Elation. Hello to you, Satyen.
Hey, James, how are you?
Good, good. I know you were just recently at the Davos Forum. That's pretty sexy. Were you like hobnobbing with, Warren Buffett, or what was going on?
Yeah, Warren seeked me out, and as did every other Fortune 500 CEO that was there and world leader. Well, not quite, but that's what I tell them.
You were actually there. Yeah, okay.
I was there, and I met some amazing people. It was an incredible event, and super privileged to go. It was one of those things that I had always wanted to do, and we got the chance to do it because our company's doing great work, and I get to take all the credit and go to the events.
Excellent. Also with us is Abner Germanow, Senior Director of Strategic Marketing for New Relic. Hello to you, Abner.
Hey, how are you?
Good, and you were there in Palo Alto, I know. So you are right in the thick of Silicon Valley.
Right in the thick of it.
Fantastic. So let's just say there's a hypothetical company out there, and they want to get on board with big data, or maybe they're a little bit on board now, but they're kind of confused that their competitors are very much on board. So say they come to you in total confusion, befuddled, and say, how do we start with this? How do we buy a new solution? How do we select a new solution among the many, many confusing choices out there? Dan, what one piece of advice would you give if a company asked you that?
The first thing I would probably, instead of tell them, I would probably ask them is just what is it they're trying to do? And what does big data even mean to them? Really understanding their use case. And I find, at Tableau we support companies from really large to really small. And I talk to a small business and they say they want to do big data, but really what they're talking about is several thousands of rows of information that maybe was sitting in Excel before, and they're outgrowing what they've been able to do with that tool. But it's still very much structured data. It's the types of things IT departments and companies have been working with for a very long time. It has nothing to do with, we'll call it log files or streaming data or IoT or anything like that. It's very traditional, but to a smaller business, it's much larger volumes of data than they've dealt with before. So the answer is different to a manufacturer of jet airplanes, as an example, or engines with sensors sending terabytes of data over the course of a flight and trying to make sense of that. And so the solution really differs, but it's really understanding what type of data you're talking about, and what the use case is, and then I'd guide them from there.
Sachin, how would you start off that process if someone came to you confused? How do we choose a big data solution?
Yeah, I mean, I think I dovetail off of what Dan said, and I'm a big believer of the Simon Sinek sort of start with the why. I think that's always helpful, and I think that the confusing and I think amazing opportunity with analytics is that there are tons of analytic vendors, companies out there, and analytics means a lot of different things to a lot of different people because it's trying to optimize and really make more efficient the process of human thinking and human reasoning and human cognition. And so there are tons of tools that do that in totally different ways. And so the why is very critical because the why guides the thing that you might look to solve and what your problems are and who your users are and where you're trying to go. And all of those questions could lead to some very, very different answers. And so I think the thing that I'd probably start by saying is there's very rarely a one-size-fits-all problem or platform overall.
So, Sachin, you dropped out for the last couple sentences. Please recap just the very end of what you said there.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was just saying that one-size-fits-all tends not to be the answer. And so that I think is probably the best piece of advice. That there's so many different tools out there. So being able to just make sure that you understand what you're trying to do and why you're trying to do it. absolutely critical.
Abner, what's your take? I mean, if it's
Yeah, so I would
please.
totally agree with Dan and everybody
Satya.
else. Well, yeah, Satya, thank you. Sorry, I totally blanked on your name for a second. And that's like, okay, what data do you have? What are you trying to solve for? And the one that we haven't talked about yet is who are you trying to empower? Right. So
The salespeople or the C-suite, you mean?
is it, yeah, like what's the, and this goes back to sort of like, what does it mean to you? What are you trying to, what is the problem you're trying to solve for? Because if you're trying to solve for, say, a data scientist problem, that's going to lead you down certain paths. If you're trying to empower a sales team or a marketing team or both, or you're trying to drive collaboration among a group of people, then that's going to drive that process. The other thing that I might think about is how unique is that problem? Is that something that's unique to your company, or is that something that many companies come into solving for?
Right. You know what fails to never fails to amaze me, and this is sort of a tangent, so please excuse me, but that gleaning insight from big data solution continues to be somewhat still hunch related. I mean, you say the numbers don't lie, the data don't lie. Let's go by the data. Let's forget human emotion. Now we're going to use the numbers, and yet it still seems that human judgment and human even gut instinct continues to be a role in how we deal with big data. Dan, am I making that up? And this is a tangent. So does it make any sense to you? Like, is it still human emotion, or are we really listening to just the numbers these days?
Well, I mean, I think you need humans to interpret the numbers, right? At the end of the day, that is our core belief here. At Tableau, it's people are inherently curious, and they have questions about their business or about whatever it is they're doing, and there's data that can help answer those questions. But it is only the people that are the experts of their domain and of that data, then therefore of itself and what it means, that are able to interpret it. Obviously, machine learning becoming incredibly popular for certain use cases, but it's very hard to just say machines will be able to generate all the answers to our questions.
Right.
And we will never need to think again. I mean, at the end of the day, the tools we're talking about and the things we're talking about, people are trying to get to, is to empower people to be curious and to scratch that itch and to find new insights and keep going and keep digging deeper. And so it's very hard to map. That's all in the human brain. It's different to each individual. So I don't see how we automate that process and answer all the questions the human brain has. We'll call it the unknown unknowns.
Right. So what about, I mean, getting back to this hypothetical decision process, it seems like part of the confusion of the big data market is that there's more than one model. I mean, when I go out and buy a car, it's going to have 4 wheels and an engine, regardless of whether it's a Jaguar or a Toyota or whatever. But if I'm going to go out and buy a big data solution, it could be any number of models. It could be in-house. It could be buying it as a service. It could be working with consultants or some permutation of those 3. Is there a model that fits? Do you have a bias in favor of one model? One model is going to be far better going forward? Sachin, what's your take? Do you have a prejudice in that view?
Yeah, I mean,
or
I think
favorite?
Yeah, no, I do. I mean, I think that Dan was, I think that the right sort of adjective here is curiosity, and I think often tool technology selection gets in the way of just getting the answer. And analytics is fundamentally sort of an iterative process. You get one answer and you got 10 more questions, and you get another answer and you get 10 more questions, and you get another answer and you got 10 more questions after that. And I think getting started is really the critical idea. And so, if I would say one thing to any individual who's starting a journey where they're going from literally 0 analytics, or even lots of analytics, to more analytics, I mean, it's really about acceleration. Because when you get to a place where you're creating sort of an inquisitive culture and people are able to answer more questions, they will do the things to reduce the barriers to answering more questions. And that's the kind of learning environment that you really want to build, and that's where the power of analytics lies. And so, one clear evaluation criteria would be what's going to get you going the fastest, and what's going to accelerate your ability to get to that insight more quickly. And that's both in terms of the implementation of that idea, that particular technology, whatever it might be, but also just on an ongoing basis, getting users up and running, getting users trained, getting users to use the system, all of that matters. And cost of entry is really just critical, because the last thing you want to do is build it by technology that's got every capability in the world but no ability to be used by a human being.
Well, is that another way of saying that you should always start off with big data as a service, or are you saying, well, no, actually, longer term, you might as well build it in-house because you're going to need it in-house? I mean, do you come down in favor of a model in particular?
No, I mean, I personally don't. I mean, I think that you could get going with big data as a service. You could get going with big data in the on-premise. I think that is sometimes an orthogonal solution. I mean, if your data lives in the cloud and you've got a clear cloud framework and understand how that's going to work, then go with the cloud. And if you've got all your data on-premise and you've got a ton of Excel files, go on-premise. And so it really depends on what your start point happens to be, but optimize for speed. And speed is going to be a different answer for one person with one set of use cases than it is for another person with another set of use cases.
Dan, agree? Do you favor one model?
Yeah, I agree 100%. And to me, the key is that optimizing for speed that Satyan talked about. It's when we're saying big data, what we're talking about are typically augmentations to existing types of data and data stores. So you had data coming from your systems of record, from your ERP systems and your transactional databases, and that's structured data that's sitting in some sort of relational database in rows and columns, essentially. And then you start to add new types of data, again, that can come from machines and sensors, or CCTV, or web logs, or all these types of things that maybe doesn't fit so well into the relational structures of your existing infrastructure. But it's augmenting what someone already has and is someone already using. So mistakes we see some companies sometimes make is getting behind this big data initiative and going completely dark from their end users as they build everything out, and then dropping it on them at once. But what I see as a more successful approach is slowly augmenting and moving over and adding to the core of what they already have. So there's more growing in the back end that IT is standing up. But to an end user, they're just now seeing more data and having more input sources to interact with, and therefore, more questions to get answers to.
Well, those companies that go dark in the middle of it, I assume, are the kind of companies that are building it in-house because it's that elaborate a structure. If they're hiring it as a service, they're not going to need to go.
Yeah, I mean, even if they brought in whether they're doing it with their own in-house IT or engineering team, or they brought in a third-party consulting firm to do it. There's still time it takes to develop the infrastructure and the different components, and there is just a lot of choice in different things. If we look at how many components are around, like the Apache Hadoop ecosystem, and around Spark, and around a number of these big data related open source projects, it can be very, very overwhelming to understand what to use for which use case, and what the right framework, what the right building blocks are, essentially. So whether or not you have that knowledge in-house, you bring that knowledge in from somewhere else, there's still typically time taken to put that together and build the right back end.
I guess I keep waiting for someone to say, and Abner, maybe you're my man to say this, for someone to come out and say, oh no, don't ever build your solution in-house unless you're Facebook or Google or someone. Building your solution in-house is a fool's errand, and you'll be outdated in 5 years anyway. So it's all about as a service.
Yeah, so part of me believes in that, and
okay.
but it depends on the use case, right? So if you have an existing infrastructure, if you have a ton of data that you already gather and parse and analyze in a variety of different ways, then augmenting to that existing system is a useful path. The other angle that we see that I see is that people have solutions and problems that they're trying to solve for, and they have.
Does your wife have an opinion?
No, my printout, the thing I was trying to print out earlier.
Oh, good. Good. You got the data. All right.
I got the data, but you have this world where when you go try to solve for particular problems, in our case, it's software data. So what happens when you have an application and you're trying to understand what's happening inside that application. And in a prior life, I did a project around sales and marketing data where we had some of the data, but we looked to a service provider for a set of other data and the ability to augment all that and make sense of it and bring the context to light. And so you do have this situation where, to Sachin's point on how do you go fast, you also want to go with how do you reduce risk. And today you can you have existing tools that in some cases you're not using the capabilities to their fullest extent. In other cases, you have situations like, let's say you're a small company where a credit card and a couple clicks on Google or a few other places can get you to the same capabilities that a large company might take 2 years and a couple $1 million and people to put together.
Right.
So, it really depends on where you're starting from and where you're trying to go. But and I think to just say a blanket across the board, no, you should always go to a service or you should always go on-prem. It all comes back to what's that problem you're trying to solve, what's the data that you have, who are you trying to empower, and how unique are you, right? And how unique is the data that you're using. So those are all, because the other thing that's getting fuzzy is like, I might say, okay, I'm going to go build this myself, but I might build it in Amazon using some of Amazon's tools, or I might build it using tools on other cloud service providers.
Oh, so even defining what's in-house and what's not in-house gets fuzzy, you're saying?
For sure.
Yeah.
So, James, can I take the bait?
Please, yeah.
I think you would be, meaning anybody who's considering building a sort of in-house data solution where they think they're truly unique. You really ought to be in the 0.001%, right? I mean, if you are trying to understand how people use your website and how people are using your online software, and you don't use New Relic or something like it, you would be insane. And if you tried to go build visualization and you think you're the only person to do this and you don't use Tableau, you'd be unlikely to be correct. And so, I mean, I do think that often in the world of technology, if you have the hammer, i.e., I can code, then the nail of building something seems attractive and reasonable. There has been extraordinarily large amounts of venture capital, customer-oriented development, investments made in analytics over the past decade. So in-house seems like a very unlikely place to appropriately invest your IT dollars.
Thank you. I guess I wanted to hear someone say that, but you put it really well, so I appreciate that. But you never know. Some people will still want to do that.
They will.
Yeah, they will.
They will, absolutely. Yeah. Yes, they will.
They will. What about, pointing to one particular data technology, data analytics technology that you would say, hey, keep your eye on this. This is the one. There's all these moving parts out there, all these things that are merging, but this is the thing to really keep an eye on. And what would that thing be? And at the same time, let me see if I can complicate that question beyond all reason. If we're talking about what technology matters, what about usability versus feature set? That's the second question. Ignore that. But really, what is that one key technology? Dan, what do you point to and say, keep your eye on this? That's the big deal.
I mean, okay, not super layup. This is showing nothing interesting, but clearly Spark has been an open source technology that's now finding a ton of different use cases in kind of the analytics space. And there's just so much going around that project. That is a interesting one for sure.
It feels like the hype around Spark is overcoming the hype around Hadoop. I don't know if you've sensed that.
Yeah, well, it is in some ways, but they're not a competing technology necessarily, right? You can work with the data, you can process data in Hadoop through Spark, right, and Spark SQL and that engine. So in many ways they can be complementary. I think one we're keeping an eye on at Tableau and we'll be doing more with is Presto, which is another SQL over Hadoop engine. We've worked with Hive and Impala and Hawk and many of the SQL over Hadoop engines. Presto is another one that we're looking at optimistically and having good performance there. But we've actually really been impressed in general with how that world has evolved, and Impala is a good example of that, really providing good interactive analytics use cases. And then not to throw too much of a softball over to my co-presenter here, Satyan, but we actually really like what his company, what Elation's doing, and things like that help in terms of establishing the data catalog and we'll call it sort of the metadata management, the source of truth across an organization, without having to do it in a really hard physical model that historically failed companies in the past. And so that maps really well to a world where, again, as people explore more data from a number of different sources, and it's not all physically living in the same environment, how do you establish some consistencies and truths across that data in those types of environments? And so their software is a really interesting one for that model.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with that. And not to make Sachin's head too big, but that the notion of data dictionaries and just understanding what exists and what's behind it is one of the things that I've told people over is we don't need more data scientists, we need more data janitors, right? Because one of the things that you see culturally within organizations is distrust of data, right? There's a notion that even if we have the data, even if it's knowable, even if it's 90% right, well, some executive got burned 3 years ago because it wasn't right, or there's just like, if it's not exactly right, then let's.
You're talking with the scientist janitor analogy, saying like prepare and clean up the data before entering it.
Yeah, well, you just have when you have lots of noise, the process of preparing the data and making it clean and analyzable is often where lots of people spend a lot of their time, right? And so anything that you can do that accelerates that effort, anything that you can do that brings clarity to what it is that you have is super important, because one of the things that I think is kind of interesting is the solutions that I think are interesting aren't necessarily the underlying infrastructure pieces. Those are definitely fascinating. But the solutions that help people do their jobs that are outside of the data analysts. So the sales and marketing teams that are empowered by having all the data that they need to know about an account or a contact. The software teams that have all the data that they need. The finance teams. There's lots of different teams, and so the technologies that I think are fascinating are the ones that empower those professions in sort of new and interesting ways. And that's something that I've been spending some time looking at in terms of, how do you kind of hide the big data-ness of the technology and yet empower users to go answer the questions that they need in ways where they feel confident about it.
Sachin, what do you think in terms of, first of all, can you clarify why you're getting the kudos from your fellow panelists?
Yeah, the checks in the mail.
But also explain exactly what they mean, just so that's really clear.
Yeah. So look, I think it gets back to this notion of curiosity very, very, very critically. So look, you can thought is an elective exercise, and I know that sounds a little crazy, but you don't have to think, and you don't have to ask questions, and you don't have to do things better. Those are things that you could do if you had time, and you could do if you had some inclination. But to get people to sort of challenge the status quo and to learn and to use those learnings to make better decisions is a tough thing to do, because you're trying to change the way in which people do what they do and think in the way that they think. Now, if it's too hard to use a given technology, so when you said usability versus features, I go completely on the side of usability, because if you can't use the thing, you're just not going to ask the question. It's going to be too hard. You're going to go do what you're going to do based upon gut instinct. Right? As a secondary idea, if you don't trust the data that you're seeing, and that's part of the problem that we solve, and we also help you find data, but broadly speaking, we provide this catalog, and like LinkedIn is a catalog, Elation basically helps inventory the data inside of a company so that you can find the data you're looking for, whether it lives in a tool like Tableau or in a database like Teradata or Hadoop. It doesn't really matter. And the basic premise is if you can't find the information fast enough, just like Google helps you find answers on the web, or Yelp helps you find information about local businesses, if you cannot find the data then and trust it, you won't use it. And so there are real challenges with information broadly, and to get information to be used, it's got to be easily accessible, it's got to be easily understandable, and it's got to be easily trusted. And absent any of those three things, people will just do the gut instinct thing because you know what you know, and this other thing just doesn't seem accessible, trustworthy enough, useful enough. And so, this is a psychology problem as much as it is a technology problem, perhaps. And I think if you want to get people to use big data, to get people to use analytics, you got to make it easy for them, and you got to make them trust what they're looking at.
Right. One last question, kind of the crystal ball question. If you look at 3 to 5 years out, where is data analytics going, and specifically, what are those coming changes going to mean to a business hoping to upgrade or get on board with their solution? How does that influence the shopping process now, thinking 3 to 5 years ahead? Dan, where is data analytics going?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it is still, we're just scratching the surface of the people who have access to the tools that can give them answers to their questions, both number of companies and within organizations. So I think that the democratization or that access to data is just going to continue to grow. You'll see, I think big data as a term will go away more, and it will just be data. And the expectation is you'll be able to work with all these different types of data, and it's living in different backends, and it's getting, the middle is getting stitched together more virtually, and then people.
What do you mean by the middle and then that?
We've had the concept of an enterprise data warehouse for 20 plus years, where all of your data coming from all the different systems that you deal with sits in one place, where it can be cleaned and managed and governed and controlled, and then views are giving out to the end users. That type of a model just is proving itself not to be scalable, not to answer the questions of, or not to allow people to answer their own questions, and certainly to do it quickly enough. And so, but the reason you had that was still so the data you see is trusted, and you have trust in what you're analyzing. So the theory is right. It's just the implementation of it and the practice of how you get to trusted data and empowering everybody with questions in your business to answer those in a trusted fashion. That's what's changing. And I think we're seeing moves away from, to Satyan's point, if you build for ease of use versus completeness of features necessarily. The latter may have low adoption if ease of use isn't there, and so what is the value of the technology ultimately if people aren't adopting it? And so we're having to change the way, both in terms of the technology we build, but also with people and with process and mindset of how you solve this problem you've been trying to solve, but in a completely different fashion, and using a different tech set for it, and managing the data source as really the currency rather than the end output itself, and empowering people in business to find those answers for themselves. That's where I see it just continuing to go down that journey.
Mm-hmm. Abner, what do you see looking 3 to 5 years out? What is this conversation going to be about data analytics in the year, say, 2021 or so?
I would agree with a lot of what Dan said. The data sources are, I think, are getting better. The collection mechanisms, the cost of collection, the cost of storage will continue to fall, but the way that the systems actually help people do their jobs, whether that's a data analyst or somebody who simply doesn't care, like they don't care what the data is behind it, they just want to know what they should do next or what should they be paying attention to. And so the ability for these systems to tell a particular job or employee or individual, here's what I think you should be paying attention to kind of create that first spark so that person can then go ask the next 10 questions. And today, too often I think analytics vendors give people blank sheets of paper and say, look at what you can go do with this. I think that will turn over time to saying, here's what we think you should be paying attention to. Now go.
Solutions will be more prescriptive. That is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Sachin, what do you see looking several years out for data analytics, and how would that inform a buying decision now?
Yeah, so I think that you start with the World Economic Forum, and I think that there is one of the interesting themes of the WEF earlier this year was this notion that machines are going to take over human jobs, and that AI and machine intelligence are going to sort of rule the world. And I think that there is some real power that comes with the ability to understand data. And I think that power allows you to make decisions. It allows you to sort of articulate yourself in a way that will make you much more of a differentiated commodity in the workforce. And I think what that means for all of us as tools vendors is that what you will see is really the tools are going to teach people how to use this stuff. And so I think that could come in examples where we give people suggestions in their roles about how to make decisions and how to think about decisions in the way that Abner articulated just now. I think that'll mean that we are going to have to teach people about what is a good conclusion, what's a bad conclusion, and what you can trust and what you can't trust. And when you're building a chart, how to build that chart and what are the best ways to exhibit it. And that's one of the powers of Tableau. And so, I think that there is a lot to do to almost enhance the skills of people. And I think what you'll find is that the compute technology, which has heretofore been the very interesting thing, the sort of last mile of processing a query or processing a transaction, whether that's Hadoop or Spark or something else, will be less important than just getting a human to really start figuring out how to answer a question and how to ask a question.
Well, I guess that would be exactly my question, in that you talk about how the solutions may provide guidance, or what it seems like at some level it would have to be a human, like.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, that's never going to go away.
So think of it this way. Today, if I'm a professional whatever, how do I prove success in my job? How do I prove that the little change that I made had an impact that looked like X, Y, or Z? Historically, that might have been me sort of BSing my way through a meeting, or somehow posturing in some way.
Just for the last part of your answer, Dan, I think it might be your microphone, or maybe Sachin, you might want to just mute your microphone for a second, because we're having so much feedback over Abner. I'm not sure if it's a quick click. We'll click just to see. Anyway, Abner, go on. Bring us home if you would.
You have this cultural problem today where in some places where you're fairly data driven, where people are empowered to say, here's the impact that I've had on my job, and they can use data to sort of prove that, and that is incredibly empowering. That takes a lot of that's both culturally important, and so when we look at, for example, successful software organizations, the more they make decisions based on data versus speculation, by running experiments and going through those actions, you allow people on the team to prove things in their own work life, and so career success starts to come through in terms of here are ways that I can prove that I had an impact on the business. And the more you make those things data-driven, the better off you are. Now, that's a big cultural shift that takes a while. It comes through tools like Tableau and others, because today there are many people who have been successful by not using data. I had the CIO of a major automotive company come to me and say, how do I get my staff to be more data driven? And the answer that we came to is that he has data nerds on his staff. They're just like 10 levels down. And so what he started doing was bringing the data nerds to his executive staff meetings, and two things happened. the first thing was that the data nerd went, oh, we have that data. I can help you make that decision. And then the second thing was that the other people in the meeting stopped BSing because they knew the data nerd was there.
Okay. Yeah.
And so, like, just that cultural shift is crazy important. And by the way, his instruction to the data nerd was just sit there, don't say anything.
Just be the threat, so to speak.
Right, just because everybody knows that person has the data,
Right.
And so but that transition that I think we take over the next 3 to 5 years is that that data nerd is not just the individual in the corner, but those skills start to flow out broader across the team.
Yeah. That's good. I think we should probably wrap up. You guys could also take your microphones off mute. I think we're in good. If you wanted to either add one more thing, or Dan or Sachin, if you yeah. I mean, are we all good to go? I think we're wrapped up. Unless you wanted to say like one last thing or anything. No, we're good. Okay, excellent. I appreciate the expertise of the three of you, and I'll send you the link. We can all tweet about it. It was fantastic. I certainly learned some things.
Awesome.
So thank you very much.
Thanks for having us on.
All right. Bye-bye.